Hi, I'm Jackie Saunders. I'm a postdoctoral investigator at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Just want to say thanks for checking out my talk today for this remote version of the SciPy conference. Today I'm going to be talking about some of the work that we've been doing at the Biological and Chemical Oceanography Data Management Office and how we're using semantic web technologies to better serve the data sets that we have in our repository. I'm going to start the talk today by going over a primer on the semantic web. If you're already familiar with semantic web technologies, feel free to skip ahead. The semantic web is a stage in the evolution of the World Wide Web from a distributed file system structure, or Web 2.0, to a distributed database system, or Web 3.0. The semantic web aims to put data in context with other data. So the idea is that each data point is linked not only to a centralized location, but each data point is linked to other data points, giving it rich linkages and contextual information. So what are semantics? Semantics are the structure of word meanings and relations. So semantics is the way that when I ask for chips, what this 5-letter word means. So if I want chips, how do you know that I want potato chips? I could want chocolate chips or maybe casino chips. A simple vocabulary would be able to tell you the difference between these three. A vocabulary can define potato chips as thin sliced sections of potato that are fried. Can define chocolate chips and casino chips and tell you that they're all different. However, an ontology gives extra information to a vocabulary as it can define these 3 different entities as, say, different classes. So we could look at the potato chips and the chocolate chips as a class of food, whereas the casino chips may be part of the class currency. At heart, all of the data in the semantic web is described in a triple declarative statement of a subject, a predicate, and an object. So here we're looking at a very simple example where we have potato is a type of food. The potato is a subject. Subjects are entities or things. There's some conceptual class. The predicate is a property of the entity. So in this case, it's the type. And an object can also either be an entity, which can then act as a subject for another triple, or it can be a literal. So it can be a string or a value, like a number value. One of the major elements of the semantic web is having consistent standards for defining data. So the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C, sets the standards for the semantic web architecture. On the left-hand side, we have what is defined as the semantic web stack or layer cake. And highlighted in the lower left corner is the current actualized web of data that BCO-DMO is participating in. Each subsequent layer builds upon the layer preceding it, adding into complexity of how data is defined and handled. At the base, there exists the URI or IRI, and this is the unambiguous web resource or uniform resource identifier. And these are used to represent specific objects within the semantic web. They follow a specified naming convention and use a hierarchical naming structure. So using that simple subject, predicate, object example of potato is a type of food, you can see that each object, as well as the property or predicate, have a specific URI associated with them. The next level of the layer is the RDF, the Resource Description Framework. And RDF is the basis of that triple, or the subject, verb, object data model. And this can be described in a couple different formats, such as N3, Turtle, RDFA, or RDF XML, which is the syntax that we commonly use at BCO-DMO. And this RDF XML basically uses the tree hierarchy and XML attributes to describe this RDF data model. The next layer is the knowledge representation languages. And these are layered in increasing orders of complexity. So RDF, which can mean both that simple conceptual model, as well as meaning RDF syntax, or the lowest, most basic vocabulary for expressing data in the semantic web. Building upon that is RDFS, or the Resource Description Framework Schema, and OWL, or the Web Ontology language, is the next most complex way of expressing data. And each one of these knowledge representation languages incorporates parts of the language just below it to build into higher levels of expressivity. So each one of these knowledge languages can be represented by an abbreviation. So RDF, this is the abbreviation for that simple knowledge language. And this is the base namespace used to define RDF. And similar for RDFS and OWL. And you'll notice that we have here this base URI followed by a hash, or sometimes followed by a slash in the namespace. And after those hashes or slashes are the designated classes or properties. This is nice because it enables you to use abbreviations when referencing URIs. So this particular long URI for RDF can be shortened and abbreviated to simply RDF type. And you'll often see that these commonly used URI bases are defined in the headers of ontologies. Here we're looking at the header for the OWL2 schema ontology. And you can see here we have these commonly used prefixes defined at the very top in the header. And you'll notice as we move down, this OWL class, so OWL all different, is being defined by an RDFS class. So you can see how the different knowledge representation languages integrate components of the less complex languages below them in the Semantic Web Stack. Finally, we have the SPARQL query language, or the simple protocol and RDF query language that is used to query a triple store, or basically used to query that data graph of an ontology or knowledge graph. SPARQL is a powerful query language. You can filter query results with it. You can create new graphs based upon your query results. You can define variables within the query like you would with relational database query languages like SQL. And you can also use regular expressions in the queries. One of the powerful things about using an ontology is that you can start to add additional information to describe objects or entities. So we can add that food has the property edible. And because of class inheritance, when we query, what can I eat? We now know that food and everything below it is edible. And so we now know that both the potato chips and the chocolate chips can be results for what you might be able to eat. So not only is it important to be able to link data within a single triple store or application knowledge graph, but what we really want to be able to do is connect the data to the outside. So I feel like if the semantic web had a couch, it would have probably bought this throw pillow from Etsy. And the way that it would be able to connect to other outside graphs is partially through sharing of pre-existing ontologies or vocabularies to help make those connections. So using RDF, RDFS, and OWL to help define classes and properties within a knowledge graph or ontology. So this is the state of the linked web of data as of 2011. And you can see the powerful connections that can be made between separate triple stores. Colored in the different circles are various types of applications. So here in pink, we can see life science related triple stores. In yellow are some geographic related triple stores. And by connecting these disparate application graphs, we can start to draw connections from Mozart to a smallmouth bass in Texas. Oceanography consists of multiple different disciplines from physics to the humanities and results in multiple types of disparate data sets. And at BCO-DMO, we try to best host all these different types of data sets in a fair data principled manner. Fair data practices make data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And not only do we have these data sets from multiple disciplines, but they're coming from many different types of measurement techniques from the field, on moorings or on various instruments deployed at sea. But they're also coming from the lab. And the data formats are in multiple different types of digital documentation. And we have over 9,000 data sets currently. So one of the ways that we're trying to best serve the oceanographic community is by moving the BCO-DMO repository to a knowledge graph. And this initiative has been driven by Adam Shepard. We are using the resource data framework in order to model the data graph. And we have also built multiple types of software to help streamline the submission and data curation process into the BCO-DMO knowledge graph. One of the major parts that really facilitates and drives this is the people. And BCO-DMO has a wonderful team of data managers that work with scientists who submit their data to curate it and clean it and make sure that it is appropriately keyed with the right metadata in order to be incorporated into the BCO-DMO knowledge graph. This is the BCO-DMO homepage. And you can see here in this database section, this is all data that's being pulled from the BCO-DMO knowledge graph. As we said before, we have over 9,000 data sets currently in the repository. And I want to draw your attention here to its parameters section. So if we look at the parameters, we can see that these are the aspects of scientific measurements or pieces of information that are most key for scientists that they would be most interested in collecting from the BCO-DMO knowledge graph. So if we look at the ocean data ontology, or the ontology that's being used to define the BCO-DMO knowledge graph, we can see that similar to the OWL knowledge language, we have our abbreviations and namespaces defined above. And listed below, we have the different classes and properties within the ontology. So we can now click on that parameter, and parameter here is equivalent to this parameter here. And we see that parameter has a subclass, monitored property, which has this data property information, like has a short description and short name. We can now look at the SPARQL query endpoint. This is a public-facing SPARQL query endpoint, so anybody can come here and search the BCO-DMO knowledge graph. Similarly, we can see all of the prefixes defined So what's nice here is that you don't have to specify the full base URI. It's already done for you. So you can use abbreviated syntax for your queries. So here we can look at the different classes within the BCO-DMO knowledge graph. And these hyperlinks allow you to kind of browse and explore the BCO-DMO knowledge graph in this way. So all of these classes, these are either going to be subjects or objects within that subject predicate object resource description framework model. And so within the classes, you can see that dataset monitored property, and parameter is also in here. So the properties, these essentially are the predicates or the verbs within the RDF data model. So these are the connecting points between the subject and object entities. So we can connect that SPARQL query language with Python using the libraries RDFlib and SPARQL wrapper. So here is just a very simple notebook that goes through some examples showing you how you can query a SPARQL, public-facing SPARQL endpoint using Python. So we can use this operation here called getSPARQL data frame. And what this does is it takes as input a string that's formatted for SPARQL, and then it hits the BCO-DMO endpoint as defined down here. This is the BCO-DMO SPARQL server. And we're also, just for simplicity's sake, defining what that Ocean Data Ontology base URI is. And this query will then return the SPARQL query result as a JSON and format it into a pandas data frame. So we can look at some simple queries. So as we did within the browser, the Snorkel browser before, we looked at properties, and we can do the same thing here. So the SPARQL query within Python is going to be written as a multi-line string. And then we can call that getSPARQL data frame operation and submit the BCO-DMO endpoint here and our query. And then we have a result of similar as we did in the web viewer. We now have all of the properties within the BCO-DMO knowledge graph returned. Now we can start to build out more complex query and ask more information. So we can start to look at the different types of parameters. So here we ran a query where we're looking for this variable that's defined here, which is a dataset parameter and master parameter. And what we're asking is, what are all the dataset parameters, or basically what are all the subjects that are linked by this predicate, and what are all of the objects? And it returns then all of these dataset parameters and master parameters. So the master parameter is then going to represent different those different main parameters that we were looking at before here. So these are the master parameters. And the dataset parameter is every time there's a dataset that has measured that type of parameter. However, it's not super helpful to look at it in this way where everything's coded by a specific URI. We don't know what that meaning is. So we can go ahead and create a more complex query and say, okay, now with these master parameters, what is the short description for that master parameter? And we can also say, only give us results that are currently active. So we're not interested in any master parameters that are deprecated. So the results to this query, we can start to see all the different master parameters and their short descriptions. And you start to see that these short descriptions are things that scientists would be interested in finding within the knowledge graph, like time of sampling, or wind velocity, or station ID, dates, times, temperature, all of those different components that build those scientific basis of understanding. So we can also use this describe feature within the SPARQL query language to get more information. So say we have one of these parameters and we want to find out more information about it. So we want to know more about parameter 901. Now we can specify an exact URI defined by using these brackets, and this will represent this particular URI. So we're going to say, describe this URI for us. When we search it, we return a series of triples. And you can see here that we have multiple subject, predicate, object triples that are returned. And they're all relating to this one point. So in this case, this point, this describe feature says, show me everything directly linked to this one point. So we can see in this case, 901, the parameter 901 is the subject. And in this case, it is the object. And we can see all of these different connections. And we can start to explore what is this information. So let's take a look at what this represents. So we can see now that 901 is ammonium, and it's ammonium and ammonia concentration parameters in any body of fresh or salt water. So that's far more helpful. Now what's exciting is that we can start to combine the powers of this SPARQL query language with Python, and we can build out more complex queries and start to integrate it with other of our favorite Python features like SciPy widgets, or some of the fantastic plotting libraries. So here in this particular example, I'm using the SciPy leaflet library to plot points, and using the BQ-plot library in order to look at interactive visualizations of data located within data points in this data set. So we're going to go ahead and generate this data set, and it will take a while because this is some hefty data. And so now what we're looking at here are 15 different data sets out of those 9,000 plus data sets within the BCO-DMO library. And what we've done is we've specified a particular search parameter. So here we're looking at nitrite. And this we can use to scale what different data sets we want to look at. So let's go ahead and zoom in on some of the data and start to explore what it looks like. So just within these few data sets, you can see we have an enormous amount of data points and data contained within. So now we can start to look at the nitrite concentrations within the different data sets. You'll notice that these type errors are being thrown. I just received a notification that SciPy leaflet has updated and fixed these type errors. But you'll notice as we click through these different points, we can see the nitrite concentrations changing. And this is just a really nice prototype that shows some of the power that you can yield by combining this linked data technology with the visualization capacity of Python. So one of the main elements of the FAIR data practices are interoperability. So one of our main goals at BCO-DMO is to help link the data within the BCO-DMO repository with outside sources. So within oceanography, in order to get the best holistic picture of the functioning of the ocean and make the best predictions about future ocean change, we have to integrate data from multiple different sources. So, for example, when looking at the Southern Ocean, there are many different countries that are currently collecting data there. And in order to get the best picture and best models, we have to be able to harvest data from all of these different resources. So usually the data is being stored in multiple different repositories. And historically, these repositories have been siloed and have been separated out and controlled with disparate formats and varying degrees of data management and using multiple different structures. So we're undergoing efforts to try to streamline the metadata curation of oceanographic data on an international scale. So that way we can better predict future climate change and ocean change. So for example, to give us better predictions in things like the UN IPCC reports. For example, here we have an overall picture of ocean change within the Southern Ocean from the special report on the ocean and the cryosphere and a changing climate. So in order to do this, BCO-DMO is trying to align our own ontology with other environmental ontologies like the NERC model and the ENVO model. We're also trying to align with other types of ontologies like KEBI and OBO Foundry types of ontologies, so ones associated with various biological ontologies. And there are some challenges here with mapping between ontologies because the various environmental ontologies are using different nomenclature structures as well as semantic models. So the iAdopt working group is currently working to try to streamline and map the different environmental ontologies so that way we can truly have a linked web of data for oceanographic and environmental data across international borders. So in order to try to map our BCO-DMO scientific data with the other environmental ontologies, we generated. This is a UI that we generated in order to help the data managers best assign the most appropriate environmental ontology class to various dataset parameters. So here we are using Python and the libraries SPARQL Wrapper and RDF Lib, as well as SciPy widgets, Pandas, and Voila as an app wrapper in order to look at the data sets within BCO-DMO. So we can look at one data set at a time. So here we're looking at the data set for CTD data for mussel study. We have associated data set information. And here we have the individual data set parameters that the data managers need to go ahead and map to an environmental ontology. Here we're trying to map to the NERC semantic model and NERC vocabulary ontology. So we can go ahead and select a different feature. So say we want to try to map the dataset parameter pressure. We can then go and start to either try to map by individual component within the NERC semantic model, or we can try to do a free select of terms to try to map pressure. So using an SciPy widget, we can go ahead and see if we can find pressure. Okay, so we have, here we go, pressure measurement. The property relates to a condition or temperature of a pressure measurement. So we also included the ability to have multiple different selections because sometimes the data managers aren't certain what is the best class within an environmental ontology that is restricted or finite. What would be the best assessment? Because sometimes the data might look just a little bit different. And so what they can do is go ahead and make multiple selections and give it varying degrees of confidence. So for here, let's say I want to go ahead and assign it as confident, but then we're not totally sure because maybe it's partial pressure. And then we could assign it a different level of confidence. And eventually what this tool does is it produces output that is then sent back to the data submitters to choose what the most appropriate assignment is. Initially, we wanted to try to map the BCO-DMO data with the NERC ontology or the ENVO ontology in order to try to limit creating yet another environmental ontology that would need to be linked with others. However, unfortunately, we found that neither of these were quite sufficient to map to our very large and extremely heterogeneous data sets. Additionally, we found some issues with consistency in use and the structure of the vocabularies. Ideally, we want to use natural language processing tools in order to help assign parameter metadata to defined ontologies. But because of these language inconsistencies, we didn't have enough success using NLP tools. We did have some moderate success using the Python package SpaCy, but ultimately the inconsistencies within the vocabularies hindered the application of NLP tools for assignment. So currently we're trying to build our own BCO-DMO environmental ontology that will then link to these other international ontologies like NERC and EVO, or NERC and ENVO. Currently, that's what we're doing, and we're going to continue to work with the iAdopt working group in order to make sure that all of these disparate environmental ontologies are connected to one another. So unfortunately, I don't have more to show you about our current status on the BCO-DMO environmental ontology because the coronavirus happened, and in addition to working on data ontologies, part of our group are also practicing scientific researchers. And so we have another software package called Metatrip, and Metatrip facilitates the identification of specific taxons within mixed organismal populations using proteomics. And what we were interested in is seeing if we could use proteomics to measure coronavirus infection. So what we did is we switched gears and put a pause on our ontology work and upgraded our Metatrip software, which is also written in Python, but this uses a PostgreSQL backend. And we generated UIs for it using Django, Voila, Jupyter, visualization tools with Seaborn and Pandas, and IPy widgets. And we applied it to coronavirus and determined that proteomics could be used in order to identify SARS-CoV-2 within a mixed population. We also identified that there is only one possible peptide shared between SARS-CoV-2 and all of the major strains of influenza, showing that SARS-CoV-2 is, at least on a protein level, very, very different from the flu. So if you want to check out some of this information, as well as our GitHub repo for this software, it's listed here. Thanks for watching my talk today. And I want to say thanks to Mac, Danny, and Adam, and all the wonderful data managers at BCO-DMO. I also want to say thank you to our funding sources, the National Science Foundation and the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. I look forward to answering any questions that you might have about BCO-DMO or about anything that I covered in the talk today during the Q&A session on Thursday, July 9th. I can also be reached by email at jsaunders@hui.edu, and I've included all of the notebooks that I covered today in my GitHub repo listed below. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of SciPy.